When Sienna, a sharp investigative reporter, wakes up to discover $9,000 missing from her corporate card, stolen in the dead of night by her sister-in-law, Dana, she expects her extended family to confront the truth. Instead, her father-in-law demands a quiet cover-up to protect the family name. Bound by corporate law and her own unwavering ethics, Sienna must choose between signing a fraudulent statement to save family peace, or telling the hard truth that could shatter her marriage and land her sister-in-law in court. My name is Sienna Myers. I am 34 years old, and for 12 years I have been paid by a regional daily newspaper, the Dayton Herald, to catch people in lies. I've sat across polished oak tables from crooked city contractors, interviewed a county auditor who maintained 3 separate sets of accounting books, and unmasked a prominent local pastor who quietly embezzled from his own youth-building fund. I do not rattle easily, so when my husband's older sister slid my wallet out of my purse at 3 o'clock on a dark Friday morning while I slept 20 feet upstairs, she picked the wrong sleeping woman. By sunrise, $9,000 was gone, blown on designer clothes, store pickup electronics, and non-refundable airline tickets to Orlando for her children. When I laid out the digital transaction records across my own kitchen counter at noon, my father-in-law looked me dead in the eye and said, "She'd never do something like that." I just smiled, because here is what none of them knew. The card she pulled from my leather bag in the dark wasn't the personal card they thought it was. It was the single card in the state of Ohio that I had no legal power to forgive. What happened at my father-in-law's dinner table 5 weeks later, involving a $9,000 cashier's check, a parish pastor, and 2 conflicting pieces of paper, is something my husband's family still refuses to talk about. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where family secrets come to light and quiet women stop being quiet. If stories about standing your ground inside your own home speak to you, leave a comment below. Tell us where you're tuning in from, and make sure to subscribe, because this story starts with a floorboard creaking in the dark. Let me back up. 8 months before that night, I married Nathan Caldwell. Nathan is 36, repairs commercial HVAC systems, and can read the mood of a room faster than anyone I've ever met. I used to think his heightened awareness was pure charm. I learned later it was survival training. You get good at predicting the weather when you grow up inside a chronic storm. We purchased a modest 2-story house on the east side of Dayton that spring. Our first home together. I loved it fiercely. The way you love something you built with your own hard-earned savings. My leather purse always hung on a brass hook right beside the kitchen door. The exact same spot every evening, because I am a creature of strict routine. That hook was actually Nathan's idea. Sunday dinner at his father's house wasn't an invitation. It was a non-negotiable standing order. Frank Caldwell, 66, a retired diesel mechanic and senior deacon at his church, carved the Sunday roast every week like a surgeon performing a delicate procedure on live television. 8 months into our marriage, my seat was still fixed at the far corner of the dining table, right next to where they stacked the extra serving trays. At first, I mistook the seating arrangement for quiet shyness. It wasn't shyness, it was a hierarchy ranking. Nathan's mother had passed away 4 years prior, and her head of table chair remained pushed in tight, as if the entire family was still reporting to her shadow. I wanted a real place at that table. I can admit that now. I wanted it more than I let myself recognize at the time. And that silent desire was precisely the handle the Caldwells would try to use to manipulate me. Dana came to stay with us in September. She is Nathan's older sister, 38, divorced, with 2 kids, Kyle, who was 12, and Tessa, who was 9. She had lost her front desk receptionist job at a local dental office back in the spring, and by Labor Day weekend, an eviction notice was taped to her apartment door. Nathan brought it up with me on a rainy Tuesday night. A damp dish towel twisted tightly in his hands, his voice pitched low like he was asking permission for something shameful. 6 weeks, he pleaded. Just until she gets her footing. I said yes because of the kids. I want that clearly on the record. 9-year-old Tessa still slept with a stuffed toy rabbit that was missing an ear. You don't turn a child like that out into a backseat. So Dana moved into our downstairs guest bedroom. The kids settled onto folding cots in the den, and my quiet, orderly home transformed into a bustling bus station overnight. During week 2, $60 in cash vanished from the entryway console table by the front door. By week 3, my expensive perfume bottle started evaporating faster than physical laws allowed. I noticed these minor irregularities because noticing things is my entire profession. I did what any sensible, practical woman would do. I installed a small lock on my home office door. I moved my late grandmother's jewelry into a small fireproof safe in the closet. And I brought it up calmly to Nathan while sitting at the kitchen table. He rubbed his face with both hands and muttered, "Maybe you misplaced it and forgot." I hadn't misplaced anything. He knew I hadn't. But I watched a dark shutter come down behind his eyes, some ancient childhood shutter closing out conflict. And I made the conscious decision not to push. My purse stayed hanging on its hook by the kitchen door because a working woman needs to grab her keys at 6 in the morning, and because some naive part of me still believed a residential bedroom hallway was a sacred boundary no family member would dare cross. I noted the missing cash in my private daily journal anyway. It was habit. I document everything. I just never anticipated how critical that paper trail would become. On the first Friday of October, I went to bed at 11 o'clock. Nathan was out of town in Columbus overnight for an HVAC installation job. Around 3 in the morning, a floorboard creaked in the lower hallway. I surfaced halfway out of sleep the way you do when living in a crowded house. A thin blade of light slid under my bedroom door, shifted, and vanished. I thought to myself, Kyla's getting a glass of water. Kids drink water at bizarre hours. I rolled over and went back to sleep. That single moment is the frame I've replayed most in my mind. But I've made my peace with it, because a person who can't sleep peacefully in their own home has already lost something far larger than money. At 6:40 sharp, my morning alarm sounded, but my phone screen was already flooded with persistent fraud notifications. They had been queuing up since 2:47 a.m., patient as Sunday churchgoers. I sat up on the edge of my mattress, scrolling through the automated alerts. 2:47 a.m., 3 round-trip airline tickets to Orlando plus a resort hotel package, $4,860. 3:31 a.m., an electronics order, a high-end smartphone and tablet set for local store pickup, $2,341. 4:15 a.m. to 4:22 a.m. Children's designer brand apparel across 3 back-to-back online orders, $1,799. I calculated the total twice because my hands needed something structured to focus on. $9,000. Exactly $9,000 spent while I slept soundly in my own bed, in my own house, while my purse hung on its hook downstairs and someone stood over it in the pitch black making a shopping wish list. Downstairs, the house was starting to wake up. A cartoon theme song was faintly playing. A frying pan was warming on the stove, and a woman was casually humming. I sat there in the gray morning light with my smartphone in my lap, and I did what I always do at investigation scenes. I got very still, and I began collecting facts. Before brushing my teeth, I called the card issuer's fraud helpline. I locked the account, formally disputed every charge, and requested full transaction details the same way I request public records from court clerks, slowly, deliberately, twice over. The airline reservations listed passenger names: Dana Caldwell, Kyle Caldwell, and Tessa Caldwell, set to depart in 9 days. The store pickup electronics order was submitted under Dana's full name with her personal cell number attached. The clothing orders were set to ship directly to my address, which required a bold level of confidence. Most critically, every single purchase had been authorized through the same internet gateway, my home Wi-Fi network. I stood in my bathroom holding the phone, and I want to be entirely transparent about what I felt. People always assume rage comes first, but rage comes later. What I felt initially was cold, professional recognition. The precise click I feel when a scrambled spreadsheet finally balances. Then I went downstairs. My leather purse hung on its hook, looking thoroughly innocent. I unzipped it. My wallet was there, my cash was intact, my personal debit card was in its slot. But my primary work card was seated incorrectly, upside down and shoved backward. The exact way someone returns an item in total darkness when their heart is pounding. Dana was standing at my kitchen stove, frying eggs and butter, humming along to the TV, wearing a satin robe I'd never seen before, with the retail tag still tucked inside the wrist sleeve. Kyle and Tessa were sitting on the couch, bathed in the blue glow of cartoons. "Morning, Sienna," Dana said, bright as a bell. You want eggs? I looked at this woman, my husband's older sister, the mother of 2 children I genuinely cared for, standing in the warm kitchen, smelling of melting butter, as if nothing in the world had transpired. No thank you, I said. What I wanted was my $9,000 restored. What I wanted even more, though I couldn't articulate it yet, was to be proven wrong. In 12 years of investigative journalism, I had never once been that kind of wrong. I waited until the kids carried their cereal bowls into the den. Then I placed my phone flat on the granite counter, fraud alerts glaring in bright red font. Dana, I said, we need to talk about 3 o'clock last night. She glanced casually at the screen, and her expression did something remarkable. It didn't crumble. It instantly rearranged itself. That's insane, she scoffed, flipping an egg. You got hacked? It happens everywhere these days. I told her the airline tickets were issued in her name and her children's names. Cybercriminals do that, she replied smoothly. They use stolen household names so the bank thinks it's legit. There were brand new shopping bags tucked into her guest room closet with tags still attached. There was a printed flight itinerary folded deep inside the kitchen trash under soggy coffee grounds. I knew this because I had already checked. Because inspecting details is what I do for a living. Nathan pulled into the driveway at noon and went completely pale when I showed him the evidence. Then he executed the move I should have anticipated. He called his father. Frank arrived within the hour, filling my entryway in his heavy Sunday church jacket. He sat down at the head of my kitchen table like a magistrate taking the bench. He allowed me to speak for precisely 30 seconds. I timed it. Then he raised one heavy hand, gentle as a traffic controller, and uttered the decree that would govern the family for the next month and a half. She'd never do something like that. He didn't ask to see the flight receipts. He didn't offer a single glance toward his daughter. He spoke it with the absolute finality of a man declaring a manufactured truth into reality. Dana stared at the floor tiles, her jaw set tight. I realized then that she wasn't remotely terrified of being caught. She had been caught plenty of times before. She was merely waiting for a familiar domestic machine to complete its cycle. And that machine was currently sitting at my table, patting my hand. Frank's tone turned surprisingly gentle next, which unsettled me far more than if he had raised his voice. Whatever occurred here, he said softly. Family takes care of family. We don't bring institutions into this. We don't bring authorities into this. You call those card companies back and cancel the claims. Cancel the disputes, and I will handle the matter internally my own way. He offered it with genuine warmth, the way a neighbor offers to assist with heavy yard work. And across my kitchen, the atmosphere shifted drastically. Nathan sat down, not beside me, a detail I registered with an editor's eye and a wife's heavy heart, but in the exact middle of the table. Equidistant. A man positioning himself between 2 opposing nations. He was 36 years old, yet he sat like a grade school boy summoned to the principal's desk, spine rigid, palms flat on the wood. I had never seen my husband look so diminished. I stated as calmly as possible that the fraud department was already processing the file, that I had locked the account at 7 that morning, and that taking swift action is simply standard procedure. Like calling the fire department when curtains catch fire. Frank's jaw tightened. An old emotion flickered across his face. Not remorse, for I would have recognized remorse, but severe offense. As though I were the trespasser who had reached into the Caldwell family vault. You called them already, he said quietly. Before you spoke to me. In his distorted math, the theft was an act of nature. Unavoidable weather, but my phone call to the bank was an aggressive personal choice. Dana quietly let out a breath she had been holding since breakfast. The internal machine had finished its cycle and rendered a judgment in her favor. Precisely as it always had. What none of them comprehended yet, what even I only partially grasped in that moment, was that this specific fraud report was never mine to cancel. Part 5. The Trap. Monday morning at 8:15, my phone rang at the Dayton Herald newsroom. It was Carol from the corporate finance department. Carol never called just to chat. Sienna, she said briskly, we have an automated fraud alert on your corporate card. $9,000 flagged over the weekend. You need to come downstairs immediately. I sat at my desk as my morning coffee turned lukewarm. That was the critical detail I hadn't disclosed to the family over the weekend. The detail I had been turning over in my mind like a smooth stone. I carried 2 credit cards issued by the exact same banking institution. My personal card and the Herald's official corporate card. The corporate card was a heavy platinum card used exclusively for public records requests, court filing fees, and investigative travel expenses. It sat in the front slot of my wallet for easy access. In the pitch dark at 3 in the morning, working quickly out of a purse that wasn't hers, Dana hadn't pulled my personal card. She had pulled the newsroom's corporate card. Do you understand what that meant? Because Frank Caldwell certainly didn't. It meant the stolen funds belonged to a commercial corporation, and the fraud was committed against a commercial bank. There was no scenario where Sienna Myers could simply choose to be sweet, sweep it under the rug, and forgive the debt. Corporate card fraud triggers an unyielding protocol. A mandatory investigative report must be filed, followed by a signed, notarized affidavit submitted within 10 business days, legally swearing under penalty of perjury that the charges were entirely unauthorized. From that point forward, the corporate legal team and the bank determine the legal outcome. Not the cardholder, and certainly not a wife attempting to maintain quiet Sunday dinners. I explained the situation to Carol in the finance office while holding my press badge. Afterward, I sat in my car inside the parking garage and laughed once, a short, disbelieving laugh. My father-in-law wanted the entire matter handled quietly inside the family fold. But in the dark, Dana had reached past every card I had the legal right to forgive and stolen the one card that answered to no family authority. That evening, I explained everything to Nathan at our kitchen table, while the distant sound of the kids' cartoons echoed through the drywall. The card belonged to the newspaper. The official fraud report was filed because corporate policy mandated it. I watched my husband process the facts. I watched him understand the reality a beat slower than he should have, because half his attention was already miles down the road at his father's house, bracing for impact. "Don't tell Dad yet," he urged. "Let me figure this out." I asked him what there was to figure out, keeping my tone gentle because I loved him, and because I could see him standing in a dark doorway I couldn't enter. "You don't know what law enforcement and banks do to him," Nathan said, his voice strained. "You don't know what it does." I filed that cryptic sentence away in my mental notepad. Meanwhile, down the hallway, Dana had grown quiet in an entirely new way. Around 9 o'clock, I heard the front door latch, and through the window, I watched her load the store-bought electronics bags into the trunk of her car. I knew where she was heading, the retail store. A 40-minute round trip to hand everything back like an overdue library book, attempting to run time backward. She returned 25 minutes later with the shopping bags still full. It was too late. The merchant had already flagged the stolen transaction from the bank's alert earlier that morning. Some doors lock permanently the moment you cross them. She stood in my driveway under the porch light for a long, silent minute holding a box tablet, discovering that reality for the very first time in her life. Caldwell relative's door was fundamentally his door. He took a seat at the head of my table without waiting for an invitation. From his coat pocket, he pulled a long white envelope and laid it down neatly. Inside was a bank cashier's check for $9,000. Beneath the check was a single typed sheet of paper. I read the text twice. It was an official statement addressed to whom it may concern, declaring that Dana Caldwell was an authorized guest user of the credit card, that the expenditures were executed with my full advance knowledge, and that no crime had been committed. A neat signature line was prepared at the bottom for my name. He had already paid an attorney to draft the document, which proved he had calculated this entire strategy. And that was somehow the most sinister aspect. $9,000, Frank said, tapping the check with his knuckle. "Every single penny. The matter is settled. Dana will repay me directly out of her own labor. That remains strictly between her and me. You sign the statement, the bank drops its inquiry, and this family goes back to being a whole family." I stated the plain truth. The money isn't mine to accept. The account belongs to the Dayton Herald. The legal victim is a commercial firm and a federally insured bank. I cannot retroactively grant permission for an act that was never authorized. Frank blinked at me, and I watched my words bounce off his consciousness like rain sliding off a polished car hood. "Then tell your company you gave her permission." he said simply. He was entirely incapable of processing it. In his 66 years, no objective truth had ever maintained standing outside his personal jurisdiction. There had never been a fact in his universe that a family vote couldn't overrule. I slid the cashier's check back across the table. I watched his large hand close over it, slow and heavy. In that chilling moment, I realized I hadn't merely rejected a financial settlement. I had rejected citizenship in his kingdom. The following week, the formal legal machinery kicked into gear. A fraud investigator from the bank called my office phone. Her name was Investigator Alvarez, polite, methodical, asking precise questions in the exact order I would have used. Where was the card stored? Who had access to the residence? Had the physical card ever left my direct control previously? I answered objectively like a formal witness, because that is what I was. Then came the official email, followed by certified mail. An affidavit of unauthorized use, accompanied by a strict deadline of 10 business days to notarize and return it. The newspaper's legal counsel walked me through the document in a conference room over stale coffee. He didn't sugarcoat the stakes. If I signed the affidavit, I was swearing under legal oath that the card usage was unauthorized. The bank would then forward the case file to the county prosecutor. At $9,000, state law classified the act as a felony theft offense. If I signed Frank's attorney-drafted statement instead, swearing Dana had permission, 3 distinct events would occur. The company's stolen funds would become my personal debt, as loaning a corporate card violated explicit HR policies. My employment record would be flagged for severe corporate misconduct. Legal counsel leaned forward and emphasized, submitting a sworn false statement to a federally insured financial institution is an independent federal crime, and individuals go to prison for it. There it sat, illuminated under fluorescent conference lights. My entire professional life had been built on uncovering truth, and now that truth had a 10-day countdown. I drove home along the river path that evening. I realized Frank Caldwell genuinely believed he was protecting his daughter from an unfair judicial system. He wasn't saving her. He was demanding that I throw my career into the machine in her place, and he would never, for a single second, recognize the injustice of his request. Next came the wave of family interventions by phone. Aunt Lorraine called first, Nathan's great-aunt, 81 years old, sweet as pie crust. "Honey," she cooed. "Family members don't do terrible things like this to each other." I asked her gently whether she meant the original theft or the reporting of it. She went silent, revealing she had never once placed those two concepts on the same shelf. A senior deacon's wife from Frank's church located my personal social media page. "Praying for your heart in this season of confusion," she posted publicly. "Church code for we have discussed your choices and chosen a side." Cousins I had met twice sent Nathan lengthy text messages. Yet, not a single person called Dana. I want you to reflect on that. In 5 full weeks, so far as I could ever determine, not one member of that extended family called the woman who actually stole the card to ask why she did it. The pressure was directed entirely at me because, in their family dynamic, I was the only moving part. Dana's stealing was treated like an unexpected snowstorm. Nobody's fault. Something to endure together. Me reporting it was a conscious decision, and decisions carry blame. The most subtle pressure occurred at Sunday dinner. Yes, we still attended. Nathan held the steering wheel with white knuckles the entire drive. Frank stood to carve the meat, bowed his head, and delivered the table grace. He added at the end, eyes closed tight, "Lord, we know Margaret is watching over this home. She always knew how to keep this family unified." Margaret, Nathan's mother, for years resting in the ground. Frank never spoke my name, nor did he speak Dana's. He simply laid a deceased mother's memory on the table like a 4th document for me to sign. I sat in my corner seat near the serving trays and recognized the tactic immediately. It's the oldest trick in political spin. When the objective facts are against you, abandon the facts and pivot to loyalty. Everyone passed the roast potatoes in silence, looking at me as if I were the one holding a blade. When the ground shifts under my feet, I do research. Not to build a legal prosecution. The bank was managing that fine without me, but because I desperately needed to understand what kind of structure I had married into. Public records do not alter their story depending on who is sitting at the dinner table. It took 2 lunch breaks at the county recorder's office. Dana Caldwell. 2 formal residential eviction filings, 2019 and 2022. Both dismissed after full back payment. The payer of record on the court documents, Franklin R. Caldwell. 3 civil small claims judgments, all settled out of court, all kept quiet. A archived police report from her former dental office employer 6 years prior. A cash drawer short by several $100s. Restitution was made in full. Criminal charges were withheld at the employer's formal request. I sat with my notebook in the newspaper's archives, surrounded by decades of local history, and watched the pattern form. There was no sudden, desperate midnight mistake in my kitchen. There was a well-oiled, decades-old protection machine that had been operating long before I entered the picture. Dana commits an offense. Frank steps in to cover the financial cost. The paper trail is buried, and everyone labels the process family love. My $9,000 incident wasn't an isolated crisis. It was merely a subscription renewal. That same night, Nathan went up to our attic to retrieve a travel suitcase for an upcoming work assignment. He stayed up there far too long. I climbed the folding steps and found him kneeling under a single bare bulb in front of a battered cardboard box with his name written on the side in faded childhood marker. Nathan, keep out, printed in thick childhood letters. He wasn't opening the box. He was simply staring at it with an expression I had never seen on his face. He quickly closed the cardboard flaps, muttered, "Just old junk," and carried his suitcase downstairs. I locked the box in my notebook. The formal affidavit sat inside my purse. The 10-day stamp was ticking down. Late that evening, Nathan finally shared the story of the $40. We were lying in bed in total darkness, his voice emerging quietly into the room. In 1971, his grandfather, Frank's father, wrote a bounce check for $40 at a local hardware store in Xenia, Ohio. It was Tuesday, the 12th of the month. The business owner pressed charges. The local sheriff's department was making an example of bad checks that year, and 2 uniformed deputies arrived at the house during breakfast. They escorted him out the front door in handcuffs while his morning coffee was still steaming on the kitchen table. Frank was 11 years old at the time. He stood on the front porch in his socks and watched the entire neighborhood observe his family's disgrace. The family lost their home within 12 months. Frank's mother took jobs cleaning commercial office buildings 3 shifts a night for a decade. The parents' marriage collapsed under the strain, and the man who eventually returned home from the county correctional facility was never the same man who left. Dad told that story exactly once, Nathan whispered into the dark. At my mother's funeral, of all places. He stood beside her casket and declared, "Nobody I love will ever owe the law again." I lay there calculating reporter math in my head. 55 years of history. One $40 bad check. And every lie, cover-up, and buried truth this family had swallowed ever since was simply compounding interest paid on that long-ago trauma. 2 nights later, unable to sleep, I went downstairs at 2 in the morning. I found Dana sitting at my kitchen table, sipping a mug of tea made from my groceries. We looked at each other in the dim light of the stove clock, 2 women in the dark at the exact hour she had chosen for her shopping spree weeks earlier. Perhaps she felt the hour created intimacy, because she began to speak. "I was going to pay it back," she said, her voice defensive. "You know that, right? Before anyone even noticed. That was always the plan." I asked her how she planned to repay $9,000 with no employment. She waved her hand dismissively. Then she leaned forward and delivered the rawest piece of honesty I ever received from her. "You have everything, Sienna. You really do. A nice house, Nathan. A career where they print your name in the paper. My kids have never once been on an airplane. Tessa asks about the ocean like it's some fictional place in a cartoon book. I wanted that for them." Her eyes were glossy, her chin thrust out, and I realized I was watching a person review her own defense and deem it entirely justified. She didn't believe she had committed a crime. In her mind there existed a grand, invisible family bank account, and she was simply overdrawn against it, as she had been her entire life. Someone would balance the ledger, because someone always did. My leather purse had simply functioned as the nearest local branch. "The kids keep asking if we're still going on the trip," she added quietly. There it was, the expectation attached to her apology. Even now, the vacation was active in her mind. I told her plainly that the tickets were flagged assets under investigation, and that no one was flying anywhere on those funds. She looked at me as if I were a broken vending machine that had swallowed her quarter. She rinsed her mug, muttered good night, and walked back to the guest room. Not once during the entire conversation did she utter the word sorry. By Tuesday, the ultimatum was straining my marriage. Nathan returned home from a contract bid that fell through, poured a drink he barely touched, and said without meeting my eyes, "Can't you just sign it? Dad's document. It's just paper." I want to be fair to Nathan. I loved him, and he was as much a casualty of this system as anyone. He spoke with deep exhaustion, not malice. But something inside me froze. Here is a piece of my own past I had never shared with the Caldwells. When I was 16 years old, my mother sat on the edge of my bed crying, holding a final utility shut-off notice. I walked to my closet, pulled down a metal tin, and handed over my entire college savings account, 3 years of babysitting and retail earnings. My mother kissed my forehead and whispered, "You're such a good girl. You never make things worse." I need you to hear that sentence the way I ultimately processed it. Not "you matter." Not "I will fix this." But "you never make things worse." That was my entire designated role. And 2 years later, the house lights were shut off anyway, the savings tin remained empty, and I left for university relying entirely on student loans I didn't finish paying off until age 31. So when my husband said, "It's just paper," I heard my mother's bedroom floorboards creak. "I've signed that exact paper before, Nathan," I told him quietly. "It doesn't purchase peace. It merely rents silence, and the rent always comes due again." He stared at me, and I could see two distinct upbringings warring inside his mind. His family's training and mine. What Frank Caldwell executed next was a masterclass in manipulation. On Thursday, Frank walked directly into the Dayton Herald main lobby, wearing his Sunday suit. He handed the receptionist a sealed envelope addressed to the publisher's office. Inside was a new cashier's check for $9,000 accompanied by a handwritten note. "Our family resolves its own obligations. I trust this fully settles the account." He didn't ask to see me. He intentionally avoided my desk. That was the brilliant maneuvering of it. By mid-afternoon, a distorted narrative was circulating through the building. A kindly, retired deacon had hobbled into the front lobby to pay off his family's debt. Yet Sienna Myers was stubbornly insisting on formal prosecution. He had completely reframed the situation. I was no longer the victim of identity theft. I was the difficult daughter-in-law refusing a senior citizen's righteous offer. The cashier's check sat in the publisher's office like a liability. The newspaper couldn't touch it. Accepting private funds to bury a criminal fraud referral is the exact kind of corruption investigative reporters expose. But its presence accomplished its goal. Stapled to the note was an invitation printed on cream cardstock. "Sunday dinner. Pastor Bill will join us. Let us resolve this matter as a family should." My senior editor, Ruth Okafor, 61 years old, 35 years in journalism, read the invitation over my shoulder. She made a noise that was half laugh, half growl. "He picked the venue, the witnesses, and the arbiter," Ruth observed sharply. "That isn't a family dinner. That's a formal tribunal. Don't play the role he scripted for you, Sienna. He's expecting the defensive reporter. Bring someone he hasn't prepared for." That evening, Frank called my personal phone. His tone was warmer than I had ever heard it. "Sienna, daughter," he began, the very first time he had ever used that word with me. "I want Sunday to proceed smoothly. But you must understand what occurs if your document goes to a courthouse." He didn't make an overt threat, he offered a forecast. "Memories are fragile things," he said softly. "Lorraine recalls you handing Dana your card at Easter. Nathan's cousin remembers you saying Dana could use it for the kids whenever needed. Under oath, family members remember what their loved ones need them to remember. That isn't lying, sweetheart, that's love." My stomach turned because there was a tiny kernel of truth he was weaponizing. Back in the spring, months before any of this, I had once handed Dana my personal card at a gas station when her tank was empty and her purse was missing. $38 one time. Take that single detail, present it to a jury surrounded by 6 sympathetic family witnesses, and watch the term unauthorized get thoroughly muddy. You're a clever girl, Frank added gently. You know a family's word outweighs a stranger's paperwork. It always has. I'm not threatening you. I'm just describing the weather. He hung up, leaving me standing in my kitchen listening to the dial tone. That night was the absolute bottom. Nathan was asleep. The house was dark. I sat at my kitchen table at 1 in the morning, unfolded the bank's affidavit, and placed it beside my late father's fountain pen, the only item of his I possess. I am going to be completely honest with you. I was ready to sign Frank's statement. I sat there constructing the rationalization in my mind. Sign the document, and my marriage stabilizes. Sign, and Sunday dinners remain manageable. Sign, and young Tessa keeps her mother at home. All it required was my signature on a convenient falsehood. Hadn't I been conditioned for that exact sacrifice since age 16? My hand actually moved toward the pen. Then a floorboard creaked behind me. 9-year-old Tessa stood there in her pajamas, holding her one-eared rabbit, squinting against the light. She looked at the papers, looked up at me, and asked with that tragic intuition children possess, "Is Mom in trouble because of us?" I answered instantly, with the absolute clarity you owe a child. "No, sweetheart. Grown-ups are in trouble because of choices grown-ups made." I poured her a glass of water, tucked her back into bed, and stood alone in the dark hallway. My own words echoed in my mind. I had just spoken to that little girl the exact truth I had spent decades avoiding telling myself. The next morning at the office, Ruth called me into her space. "Investigator Alvarez called our legal team as a courtesy," Ruth informed me. The bank retrieved the digital footprint. The travel bookings were executed directly from Dana's smartphone, her user ID, her stored traveler profile, down to her seat selections. They have store security footage of the electronics pickup attempt. This train departed the station the moment she made those purchases. You are not the engine, Sienna, and you were never the brakes. She looked at me over her glasses. The only thing you decide is whether the permanent record shows you told the truth or swore to a fraud. Truth doesn't need you to protect it. It needs you to stop negotiating with people who are terrified of it. I walked back to my desk, and for the first time in 5 weeks, the fog completely cleared. Sunday arrived gray and cold. I dressed as if attending an official deposition. A sharp blazer, sensible flat shoes. Nathan watched me from the bedroom doorway and asked softly, "What are you going to do?" "I am going to tell the truth once out loud, in the room where all the lying gets organized," I replied. "Whatever happens after that is up to everyone else." He nodded slowly. He didn't ask which paper was inside my bag, and I loved him for that. The answer was both. The unsigned bank affidavit and Frank's typed statement. The drive to Frank's home was made in complete silence. Nathan held my hand at every red light, letting go only to shift gears. Frank's dining room was staged like a holiday card. 14 people assembled. Extended relatives, Aunt Lorraine, the deacon's wife, and Pastor Bill seated at Frank's right hand. The roast chicken was steaming, served on Margaret's fine china. The set reserved exclusively for holidays and major family milestones. And then there was my seat. Not at the corner, not by the tray stack. A formal place card bearing my name was positioned directly to Frank's left. 8 months I had occupied the low seat, and the week he required my signature, I was elevated to the head of the table. Arranged neatly beside my water glass was the envelope containing the cashier's check alongside the attorney's statement, marked with 3 yellow sign-here tabs. Pastor Bill offered a lengthy grace focusing heavily on forgiveness and the danger of allowing worldly legal systems into family life. Everyone murmured, "Amen." Frank stood up to carve the chicken. He was commanding, silver-haired, composed, illuminated by the lamp light. "Before we eat," Frank announced, "I wish to say a few words. The world outside will cheat you and sell you out for $1. In this house, we do not do that to one another. Family is the only court that matters, and its verdict is always mercy." He set the carving knife down, looked across his assembled family, and delivered his signature line one final time. She'd never do something like that. 13 pairs of eyes turned to me, waiting for my compliance. Pastor Bill held out a pen. "Sienna, daughter," Frank said, his face softening warmly. You signed that document, and the check is yours. Dana will repay me over time. And you won't just be Nathan's wife who works at the newspaper. You will be my daughter, fully and completely. The matter closes. The room was dead quiet. I looked at Dana across the table. In her expression, I didn't see victory. I saw a profound, tragic pity. The pity of a lifelong inmate watching a new arrival be offered the exact same compromise she had accepted years ago. Nathan's hand touched my knee under the table, steady and supportive. I reached into my bag. The room collectively exhaled. What I pulled out was not Pastor Bill's pen, nor was it Frank's document. It was the bank's affidavit of unauthorized use. I unfolded it and smoothed it flat against Margaret's fine tablecloth. I uncapped my father's fountain pen. Before anyone eats, I am going to state a few objective facts, I said, my voice steady. Frank, I ask that you simply listen. In 1971, 2 deputies took your father off his porch over a $40 check, and your family lost everything. You were 11 years old. You've spent 50 years trying to ensure no one you love ever faces legal consequences again. But look at what that protection bought. Frank went entirely rigid, but I continued. Your son ran a paper route at 13, saved $211, and you took it for Dana's dental needs, labeling it borrowed in his ledger. He is 36 now, and he still sits at this table with hunched shoulders asking for your implicit permission. Your daughter is 38, and she has never been allowed to experience the natural consequences of her actions. You covered a missing cash drawer, 2 housing evictions, and 5 weeks ago she walked through my home in the dark and took $9,000 from my bag. She wasn't even afraid, because she expected you to pay the bill. I looked around the room at the quiet faces. I cannot sign your statement, I concluded. The card belonged to my employer, and the truth was never mine to trade for a seat at this table. The truth doesn't require my permission. In front of 13 family witnesses, on Margaret Caldwell's fine china tablecloth, I signed my legal name to the affidavit using my father's pen, dated it, and slid the $9,000 cashier's check back across to Frank. The reaction wasn't an outburst, it was a heavy, cold silence. Frank stood up, his hands trembling slightly. Then you are not family, he said, his voice cracking down the middle. You were never family. Dana stood up silently and began gathering her children's coats. I folded my document, capped my father's pen, and walked the length of the dining room alone, past the sideboard, past Margaret's empty chair. 5 steps that took 5 weeks of courage to walk. Behind me, I heard a chair slide back. Nathan stood up, looked at his father and said quietly, I'll get her coat. It was raining lightly as we drove home. Nathan kept his eyes on the road. As we stopped at a traffic light on Wayne Avenue, wipers humming, he finally spoke. 36 years. Everyone in that house has been telling me who I am supposed to be since I could walk. You were the first person who didn't ask me to lie. The light turned green, and tears quietly ran down my face, not from grief, but from relief. I hadn't lost a true family back in that dining room. You cannot lose something that was never genuinely offered to you. What I had actually done was put down an emotional debt I had been carrying since I was 16 years old. Here is how the situation ultimately settled. Dana relocated her children back to Frank's house that evening. The bank forwarded the investigative file to the county prosecutor, who offered Dana a formal pretrial diversion agreement, due to it being a first official offense. She signed a written admission of responsibility, entered a mandatory court-ordered repayment plan for the full $9,000, and was assigned 100 hours of community service. If she completes the program successfully, no felony conviction will remain on her record. I never wanted her incarcerated. I simply wanted her to exist in a world with realistic boundaries. That autumn, Dana secured a job at a regional distribution warehouse. 5 months later, she is still employed there, the longest she has held a single position in years. In March, she came by our house alone, stood on the front porch, and handed me a sealed envelope. Her first court restitution payment had cleared, and inside was a separate personal check drawn on her own account from her earned wages. Don't tell Dad, she said quietly and left. I held that check, realizing I had just watched a decades-old family chain lose its very first link. The newspaper was fully reimbursed by the financial institution, and corporate HR closed its review with an official letter confirming no wrongdoing on my part. Frank has not changed, nor do I expect him to. The Caldwell Sunday dinners continue without us. The official narrative circulated among distant relatives is that the newspaper daughter-in-law destroyed the family over money. Nathan began personal therapy that winter. He keeps his childhood paper route ledger on his desk next to his house keys. When I asked him why, he replied, "To remind myself of the real cost of keeping quiet. Kyle and Tessa still visit our house regularly, and my purse hangs exactly where it always hung, on the brass hook beside the kitchen door, unlocked, in a house where I sleep peacefully through the entire night." I used to believe that love meant paying quiet debts so no one had to leave the table. But protection that requires sacrificing the truth isn't protection at all. It's just a bill the family keeps forwarding to whoever loves them most. The kindest act I ever performed for the Caldwell family was finally marking that bill returned to sender. Thank you for listening to today's story on Com Drama Stories. If this narrative reminded you of a table where your own truth was denied a seat, perhaps it's time to stand your ground. Share this story with someone who needs it, and drop a comment below telling us, what would you have done with those 2 pieces of paper? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories.